Okay, this is the deck I've actually been waiting to do in this series. The BDD layer. Cucumber plus Playwright.
Cucumber. I'll be honest, when I hear cucumber, my first reaction is didn't the whole industry try Gherkin around 2015 and quietly give up?
Completely fair. Half the engineers I know have a scar from a given when then suite that rotted.
SpecFlow literally got discontinued. The .NET one. Tricentis killed it end of 2024 and the community had to fork it as rec when roll.
Right, and yet here we are doing a whole episode on it. Because the thing that killed BDD the first time around just changed.
Which thing?
The glue. Gherkin itself was never the problem. Write the behavior as given, when, then sentences. Lovely. The problem was that every one of those sentences needed a step definition, handwritten, maintained forever.
The tax. Yeah. The PM writes one sentence, an engineer spends an afternoon wiring it up.
And that tax is exactly what coding agents are good at paying. The tagline on this slide is the whole pitch. Scenarios your PM can read, your agent can generate, and your CI can verify.
One artifact, three audiences. That's actually a neat framing.
So the cast is small. Cucumber reads the .feature files and matches each line to a step definition. Playwright is the muscle underneath. Real Chromium, real clicks, real assertions on the screen.
Why Playwright and not Cypress, out of interest?
Mostly the architecture. Playwright drives the browser from outside over the DevTools protocol, so it does multi-tab, multi-browser, network interception, traces, and it doesn't fight you the way the in-browser runners do.
And the trace viewer alone is worth the switch, honestly. Time travel debugging on a failed CI run.
Exactly. So picture the gap we're closing. A spec is a promise written in prose. Code is a promise written in syntax. Between them is the place where every misunderstanding on every project has ever lived.
The gap where the PM says one-click checkout and the engineer builds a three-step wizard.
That exact gap. BDD's one trick is to fill it with sentences that are simultaneously plain English and executable test input.
Okay, but that trick existed for 15 years. What's genuinely new here?
Who participates? In the old world, BDD needed an engineer in the loop for every sentence. Now an agent reads the spec, drafts the scenarios, writes the step definitions, and the human's job shrinks to approving behavior in plain language.
So the human review moves up a layer, from reading TypeScript to reading English.
Which is the layer humans were always good at judging anyway.
And the layer they were always skipping in code review, let's be real.
We've all approved a 2,000-line test PR on Vibes.
So the agenda is the Gherkin language itself, then the Cucumber Playwright machinery, then agents in the loop, then the anti-patterns.
And the anti-pattern section is load-bearing. Every dead BDD suite died the same 4 ways. We'll name them.
All right, I'm in. Where does this layer actually sit in the spec-driven stack?
That's slide 2. Let's go.
So this slide is the org chart, spec on top, Gherkin in the middle, step definitions and Playwright underneath, CI verdict at the bottom.
I think of it as 3 floors of a building. Top floor is pure human intent. Prose. Ground floor is a running product being verified by machines. BDD is the staircase.
Okay, but staircases get skipped. People take the elevator straight from spec to code all the time.
They do. And then nothing connects the two. The spec says one thing, the code does another, and nobody finds out until a demo.
Or until a customer finds out for you.
So here's the bit I want to slow down on. Look at the example acceptance criterion. A signed-in user with a saved card can check out in one step. Read the shape of that sentence.
Starting condition, action, expected outcome.
Right. Given, when, then are already in there. The acceptance criterion is 90% of a Gherkin scenario before anyone has opened an editor.
Huh. So the translation is nearly mechanical.
Nearly mechanical. And that phrase matters a lot more in 2026 than it did in 2016. Mechanical translation is exactly the task you can hand a coding agent without losing sleep. there's very little creative interpretation, which means very little room for the agent to drift.
Hold on though. If it's that mechanical, why do we need the gherkin layer at all? Why not have the agent go spec straight to playwright tests?
Good pushback. We tried exactly that on a project last year. Agent reads the spec, emits raw playwright spec files.
And?
It worked until review time. The PM cannot review 400 lines of TypeScript with locators in it. So the human gate either disappears or falls on an engineer who's reading selectors instead of behavior.
So gherkin isn't for the machine at all. It's the review surface.
That's the insight. The middle layer exists so the approval happens in a language the approver actually speaks.
And below it, each gherkin line matches to a step definition, which calls playwright, which drives a real browser.
So the same sentence the product manager approved is literally the sentence the CI pipeline executes. No translation step where meaning can leak.
The payoff bullet says every acceptance criterion maps to a scenario almost one-to-one. Do you actually enforce that mapping or is it aspirational?
You can enforce it. Tag each scenario with the spec section it verifies. Then a CI check counts criteria without scenarios. We'll spend a whole slide on that later. Drift detection.
Of course, there's a slide for it.
There's always a slide for it. But the one-liner for this one sentence, 3 audiences. The PM reads it, the agent generates from it, the browser verifies it.
Okay, then I want to actually learn the language. What does gherkin look like up close?
Next section. And the whole grammar fits on one slide. Right, the grammar lesson. The good news is gherkin is tiny. The whole keyword set fits in your head in 5 minutes.
Famous last words. C++ is just classes plus functions.
No, genuinely. Look at the slide. Feature, rule, scenario, given, when, then, and, but. That's the language. 8 words.
Okay, top down. Feature is the file?
One capability of the product, usually one file. Check out. Inside it, rule names one business rule. Here it's orders require a valid payment method.
I never see anyone use rule actually. Is it new?
Newish, landed in Gherkin 6 around 2019, and most teams never noticed. Which is a shame because it's the best grouping construct in the language. The rule is the promise, and the scenarios under it are the evidence.
Promise and evidence. I like that framing.
Then the scenario itself. Think of it as a 3-act play. Act 1 is given, the world before anything happens. Signed in customer, item in the cart, saved Visa card.
State, not action. Nobody does anything in a given.
Exactly. And that distinction trips up every newcomer and most agents on their first draft. Act 2 is when, the single trigger. The customer completes checkout. Act 3 is then, the observable outcome. Order confirmed.
And the and but lines?
Pure continuation. And a saved Visa card ending in 4242, that continues the given. But the card is not charged twice. That continues the then with a negative expectation.
Wait, that last one is doing real work. Not charged twice is an idempotency check, sitting right there in plain English.
Yes, that's my favorite line on the whole slide. A double charge bug is the kind of thing that gets a company on the news. And here it is as a one-line but.
Speaking from experience?
A retry storm once charged a customer 3 times at a previous job. Payment provider webhook timed out. Our code retried the charge instead of the status check. A but line like this one would have caught it in CI.
Okay, so what's the discipline? When I'm reviewing a scenario an agent drafted, what am I checking line by line?
1 question per line. Is it state, action, or outcome? Given lines are state, phrased as already true. When lines are exactly one action. Then lines are something a user could see or a system could prove.
And if a line doesn't fit any of the 3?
Cut it. No exceptions. A line that's neither state, action, nor outcome is decoration. And decoration in a spec is debt.
Harsh but fair. What about when the same scenario needs to run against 10 different inputs? Copy-paste 10 times?
Please no. That's the next slide. Outlines and example tables.
Okay, two new keywords on this one: background and scenario outline. Both look like deduplication tools.
That's exactly what they are. And both come with a sharp edge, so let's do them carefully. Background first. It's a set of given steps that run before every scenario in the file. Here, every pricing scenario needs the catalog to contain an espresso machine at $120. So you say it once at the top.
Like a Benno Burr, basically.
Mechanically, yes, but with a readability twist. A Bezier is code. Nobody reads it linearly. A background is part of the spec, and every reader has to hold it in their head while reading every scenario below it.
Ah, so a fat background quietly breaks every scenario in the file comprehension-wise.
2 or 3 lines, max. I reviewed a feature file last quarter with an 11-line background. Seeded users, feature flags, 2 API mocks. Every scenario underneath looked innocent, and none of them were understandable on their own.
The iceberg pattern. 3 visible lines, 11 hidden ones.
Stealing that. Okay, scenario outline. It's a template. The angle bracket placeholders, TQ and total, get filled from the examples table, and each row runs as a completely separate scenario.
So 3 rows here means 3 independent verdicts in the report. 1 machine at full price, 10% off at 3, 20% off at 10.
And notice what those rows are. 1, 3, 10. Not 1 through 10. The rows are the boundaries, the exact quantities where behavior changes.
Why not throw in a few mid-range values for safety? 4, 5, 6?
Because they add runtime without adding knowledge. If 3 units gets the discount and the math is a multiplier, 4 units passing tells you nothing new. Each browser-level row costs you, what, 20 to 30 seconds in CI?
Easily. Times every PR, times every developer. That's real money.
Which brings us to the warning on the slide. And I've watched this one kill a suite. A team I worked with had a shipping calculator outline with 43 example rows. Every weight band, every country, every carrier combination.
43 rows through a real browser?
22 minutes for that one outline. People started merging without waiting for CI, which defeats the entire point of having CI.
And the fix is the pyramid, right? The 43 combinations become unit tests against the pricing function, millisecond each, and the outline keeps the 3 rows the business actually named.
Exactly that. The slide's rule of thumb is 6 rows max, and honestly, 6 is generous.
Does this matter more or less with agents drafting the scenarios?
More. Agents love exhaustiveness. Ask for examples and you'll get 20 rows beautifully formatted. You have to put the restraint in the prompt. Boundaries only. Point everything else at unit tests.
Teaching the machine restraint. There's a sentence.
Welcome to 2026. Next slide is the big one though. The single most important style decision in Gherkin.
Bold claim. Let's see it.
Okay, this slide. If a team takes exactly one thing from this whole deck, I want it to be this one.
2 versions of the same login test. Left one looks fine, honestly. Open the login page, type the email, type the password, click submit, see the welcome banner.
It does look fine. That's what makes it dangerous. Read it again. Every line is a browser instruction. Type into #email. Click the #submit button. It's a robot transcript. And it feels precise, which is the trap. Now a designer renames the submit button ID during a redesign. What happens?
Scenario goes red, but login still works.
Right. The behavior didn't break. The screenplay broke. And the test report can't tell the difference. Red is red.
Multiply by 200 scenarios and 1 rebrand.
I lived this one. Previous company, marketing-driven redesign. About 180 imperative scenarios went red overnight. Not one of them had found a bug. We spent the better part of a sprint doing find and replace on selectors.
And the team's takeaway was probably not, let's write better Gherkin. It was, these tests are a tax, delete them.
That's exactly how suites die. Not with a decision, with an erosion of trust. Now look at the right side. Anna has a registered account. She signs in with valid credentials. She sees her personalized dashboard. No URLs, no selectors, no field names at all. All that mechanical detail moves down into the step definitions, into code, where refactoring is cheap and your editor can actually help you.
Devil's advocate though. Doesn't the detail have to live somewhere? You've just moved the breakage from the feature file to the steps file.
Good. And the answer is yes. But moving it changes its cost completely. One step definition serves 50 scenarios. The selector exists in one place instead of 50. One edit heals the whole suite.
Ah, it's just dry applied at the right layer. The feature file holds the stable thing, intent, and the code holds the volatile thing, mechanics.
That's the cleanest way I've heard it put. Intent changes slowly, the DOM changes weekly. Put each where it belongs.
Is there a quick smell test for catching imperative creep in review?
The PM test. Read the scenario out loud to your product manager. If any line makes them say, "What is hashtag submit?" that line is at the wrong altitude.
And with agent drafted scenarios? I've noticed models trained on a decade of Selenium tutorials default to the click and type style.
Constantly. The fix is two examples in the prompt. One imperative marked bad, one declarative marked good. Models follow contrast examples far better than abstract rules.
Same as junior engineers then.
Same as all of us. Next up, the habits that keep a scenario trustworthy a year from now.
Scenarios that age well. I like that framing. Most test suites I've inherited age like milk.
Right. And the slide's premise is the cure. A scenario isn't finished when it passes. It's finished when it can survive a year of product changes without lying to you.
4 habits. First one behavior per scenario, one when, one reason to fail.
This is the one with the biggest payoff at 3 a.m. If a scenario signs in, edits a profile, and checks out, and it goes red, which of the three promises broke?
You get to open the trace viewer and find out. 20 minutes of archaeology per failure.
Whereas a scenario named coupon reduces total at threshold that goes red? The name is the diagnosis. You barely need the trace.
Self-explaining failures. Okay, habit 2. No UI selectors in Gherkin. We just did a whole slide on that.
We did. So just the rule of thumb. Gherkin describes the business. Page objects describe the DOM. And the two never trade places. Moving on.
Habit 3. Ubiquitous language. That's a domain-driven design term, right? Evans?
Eric Evans, The Big Blue Book, 2003. And the idea is almost embarrassingly simple. Everyone uses the same nouns. If the spec says saved card, the scenario says saved card.
Not stored payment method?
Not card on file, not payment instrument. 3 names for one concept means every reader does a mental join, every time, forever.
And it's not just readers. If the vocabulary matches exactly, you can grep your way from a spec line to its scenario. The traceability is literally string matching.
That's the bonus the slide is pointing at. An agent doing drift detection has the same problem a new hire has. It needs to connect spec language to scenario language. Matching vocabulary makes that connection trivial. Synonym soup makes it guesswork.
So the discipline that helps the intern helps the model. Same suite.
Exactly the slide's closing point. A disciplined human suite and an agent-friendly suite are the same suite. There's no separate machine-readable format to maintain.
And habit 4. Only load-bearing details. This is the subtle one. What's the test?
For every concrete value, ask, if I change this, would the outcome change? If the test passes identically, whether the customer is named Anna or Boris, the name is decoration.
Does a stray name actually hurt though? It's one word.
It hurts more than you'd think, because readers assume every detail is there for a reason. I once watched 2 engineers spend an afternoon trying to figure out why a scenario specified a customer from Germany. Theories about VAT, about GDPR consent flows,
And the answer?
the original author liked the name Greta. That was it. The detail was noise, and it taxed every reader for 2 years.
An afternoon of engineering time spent on someone's naming whim. Okay, cut what doesn't bear load, name what does.
That's the craft section done. Now let's wire this language to an actual browser.
Finally, some code.
Alright, the machinery. 4 layers, each with exactly one job. And honestly, the boundaries between them are the whole architecture.
Top of the diagram is the spec, then the feature file, then steps, then page objects, then playwright, then the report. Walk me through who does what.
Cucumber first. The NPM package is cucumber/cucumber. It's the conductor. It passes the dot feature files, and for every Gherkin line, it searches your step definitions for a matching pattern. Match found, it runs that function.
And if there's no match?
It fails loudly, and this is a nice touch. It prints a skeleton for the missing step. Copy, paste, fill in the body.
Oh, that's handy for agents too, actually. The skeleton output is basically a machine-readable to-do list. Feed the undefined step report back into the agent, and it knows exactly what glue to write.
Exactly how we run it. The key thing about Cucumber, though, it never touches the browser. Purely orchestration.
Layer 2, step definitions. The slide calls them thin glue.
Deliberately thin. One business sentence in, 1 or 2 page object calls out. If you ever find 15 lines of logic inside a step definition, that logic is in the wrong house. It wants to live in a page object or a helper.
Why so strict? It's all test code either way.
Because fat steps don't compose. A step that does 5 things can only be reused by a scenario that wants those exact 5 things. So people write another fat step, and soon you have 400 single-use steps.
A step library with no library qualities.
Right. Layer 3. Page objects, the only layer allowed to know selectors. The checkout page object knows where the pay button lives, how the card form behaves, what the iframe situation is.
Quick aside, page objects are an old Selenium era pattern. Some playwright folks argue you don't need them anymore because locators are so much better now.
Fair point, and for a plain playwright suite, I half agree. By GRP role gets you a long way. But in a Cucumber stack, the page object earns its keep differently. It's the one place where DOM knowledge concentrates, so a redesign means editing one file. And every scenario that touches that page heals at once.
One change, one place. The opposite of the 180 scenario sprint from earlier.
Exactly the opposite. Layer 4. Playwright itself, the muscle. Chromium, Firefox, WebKit. Auto-waiting built in so nobody writes sleep statements.
The auto-waiting deserves a sentence on its own, honestly. Half of all Selenium flakiness was hand-rolled waits. Playwright retries the assertion until the element is actionable. That one design decision deleted an entire genre of flaky test.
And when something does fail, you get the trace. DOM snapshots, network log, console, and a screenshot. Debugging starts with evidence.
Okay, so the payoff box. Each kind of change touches exactly one layer.
This is the part I tattoo on the architecture. A redesign touches page objects only. A copy change touches nothing if your steps use roles and patterns. And a behavior change touches Gherkin.
Which is precisely the diff a human should be reviewing anyway.
You've got it. The layering isn't tidiness for its own sake. It routes each change to the audience qualified to review it.
Alright, show me the actual glue code then.
Next slide. It's shorter than you'd expect.
Okay, actual code. 3-step definitions. The given, the when, the then from the checkout scenario. That's really not much code.
That's the point of the slide. Look at the given. A signed-in customer with an item in the cart. The function body is 2 page object calls. Sign in as customer. Add the espresso machine to the cart. Done.
So each definition pairs a text pattern with an async function, and Cucumber does the matching at runtime.
Right. The step is a translator, nothing more. All the browser mechanics live a layer down in the page objects.
The thing I want explained is the typed this. Function, this : shop world. What is the world exactly?
The world is Cucumber's best idea, and almost nobody talks about it. It's the object that this points to inside every step, and Cucumber creates a brand new one for every single scenario.
Every scenario gets a fresh object?
fresh, from scratch. Ours holds the playwright page, the page objects, and whatever data the scenario accumulates along the way. And that means Scenario 3 cannot see anything Scenario 2 created. They literally lived in different objects.
Oh, that's nice. Isolation by construction, not by discipline.
That's the phrase on the slide, and it's load bearing. There's a whole genus of flaky test. The test that only passes when run after some other test. That becomes structurally impossible. Not discouraged, impossible.
As someone who once spent 3 days on a test that failed only on Tuesdays, structurally impossible is my favorite phrase.
Tuesdays?
Weekly cron job mutated a shared fixture row. 3 days of my life.
Classic shared state ghost. The world pattern is the vaccine. Okay, hooks, the second bullet.
Before and after. Set up and tear down around each scenario.
The before hook launches a fresh browser context. And note, context, not browser. A playwright context is like an incognito window. Takes maybe 50 milliseconds versus a full browser launch at over a second. Fresh cookies, fresh storage, shared process.
Cheap isolation. And the after hook?
The after hook is where the debugging experience gets made. It checks whether the scenario failed, and if it did, it saves the playwright trace and a screenshot before tearing down. So when CI goes red at 2 a.m., the evidence is already attached to the report.
Honestly, trace on failure is the single highest value line of config in this whole stack. You open the trace viewer, scrub the timeline, see the DOM at the exact moment, the network called at 500. No reproduce locally dance.
None. And the last bullet ties back to the style argument, reuse. The step, the order is confirmed, has no scenario-specific anything in it.
So every checkout scenario ever written reuses those same 3 lines of glue.
Which means declarative style literally changes the growth curve. Write declaratively, and your step library grows logarithmically. New scenarios mostly reuse existing steps. Write imperatively, and it grows linearly, forever. One bespoke step per sentence.
And if an agent is generating the glue, a small reusable step library also means a smaller prompt context. The agent sees 30 generic steps and composes, instead of inventing step 401.
Yes, reuse pays twice. Okay, next up. Making the suite fast enough that people actually run it.
Tags and parallel workers, go.
Here's a rule I'd defend in any architecture review. A suite that takes 40 minutes gets skipped. A suite that takes 5 gets trusted.
Skipped is generous. At my last place, the 40-minute suite got an admin merge button and a culture of using it.
Right. And once bypassing CI is normal, you don't have CI. You have a suggestion box. So this slide is the speed toolkit. Tags first.
Add smoke and add whip on the slide. Labels you sprinkle on features and scenarios.
Add smoke marks the critical path. The dozen-ish scenarios that prove the product is fundamentally alive. Sign in, add to cart, check out, see the order. That's your 5-minute confidence pass on every PR.
And at whip?
Work in progress. Scenarios that have been drafted but not wired up yet. And this tag got way more important in the agent era, by the way.
How so?
Because agents draft scenarios faster than anyone wires them. You want those drafts committed and visible. They're the plan, but not failing CI. At whip is the parking lane. Drafted, reviewed, excluded from the verdict until the glue lands.
So the routing happens in the config, that tags line. If CI is set, run smoke and not whip. Otherwise, run everything.
And nightly runs the full suite with no filter. PRs get speed, nightly gets coverage. Then there's the quietly powerful one, tagged hooks.
A before hook that only fires for scenarios tagged at payments?
Exactly. It spins up the payment sandbox, Stripe test mode, fake webhook endpoints, whatever. But only for the scenarios that need it. Everyone else skips the cost entirely.
Setup stays adjacent to the scenarios that need it instead of one global setup that pays every cost for every test.
Which is how global setup files become 200 lines of who even needs this. Okay, the big lever. Parallel workers. Parallel 4 in the config means 4 separate worker processes.
So, roughly a quarter of the wall clock time, give or take coordination overhead.
Give or take. Browser scenarios are slow per unit, 20-30 seconds each. So parallelism is the difference between a suite people run and a suite people dodge.
And now the warning box, because separate processes share nothing except the database and the backend, which they absolutely do share.
There it is. The discipline parallelism demands. Every scenario owns its data. Unique email addresses, isolated cards, per worker sandbox accounts.
Tell the ghost story. There's always a ghost story.
There's always a ghost story. Two workers share one test user. Worker A finishes its scenario and empties the cart, while worker B is mid-checkout on the same user. Worker B fails with an empty cart error that makes no sense.
And it reproduces.
Once a week. Only in CI, never on your machine. Because locally you run one worker. We chased a failure exactly like that for close to a month before someone diffed the timestamps and saw two scenarios using test@test.com 4 seconds apart.
A month for a shared fixture.
So the rule of thumb, generate identities, never hardcode them. A timestamp plus the worker ID in every email address, every order, every cart. Build that in on day one and the ghost story never gets told about your suite.
Cheap insurance. Okay, machinery's done. Where do good scenarios actually come from in the first place?
From a conversation, it turns out. Next slide. Example mapping. Okay, gear change. Before BDD is a tool chain, it's a conversation. And this slide is the best format anyone has invented for that conversation.
Example mapping. I've heard the name. This is the index cards thing?
The index cards thing. It comes from Matt Wynn, one of the Cucumber founders. He wrote it up around 2015. 4 colors of cards, 25 minutes, no laptop required.
A software practice that requires no software. Suspicious. Walk me through it.
One yellow card goes on the table. The story. Here it's free shipping over $50. Everything else hangs off that card.
Then the blue ones?
Blue cards are the rules hiding inside the story. Free shipping kicks in at $50. And the sneaky one, the threshold applies to the total after discounts.
Oh, that second rule is the kind of thing that never makes it into the ticket. Someone just assumes pre-discount, someone else assumes post-discount.
And 6 weeks later, support gets a ticket about being charged shipping on a $55 cart with a coupon. The rules card forces that assumption onto the table while it's still cheap.
Green cards. Examples. Concrete cases per rule.
A $49.99 cart pays shipping. A $50 cart ships free. A $60 cart with a $15 coupon drops below the line. Charged. Look at those. Each one is a gherkin scenario missing only the syntax. The translation is close to 1-to-1.
$49.99 and $50 exactly. Boundary pairs again. Same scale as the outline rows from earlier.
Same skill, earlier in the pipeline. And then the red cards, which are honestly the entire reason to run the workshop.
Questions. Do gift cards count toward the total?
And here's the moment that sells it. Someone asks that and the room goes quiet. The PM doesn't know. The tech lead doesn't know. Nobody knows.
And that silence is the finding. It's not a testing gap. It's a hole in the spec.
Discovered for the price of an index card instead of a production incident. I've run this workshop maybe 30 times, and there has never been a session with 0 red cards. Not once. The spec always has holes. The only question is, who finds them? You or the customer?
And the time box in the green box? 25 minutes per story?
Hard time box. If you can't map a story in 25 minutes, the story is too big or too vague. And that discovery alone pays for the meeting. Split it and come back.
And more than 3 red cards means...
The spec isn't ready. Back it goes for another pass before anyone writes code. Cheap insurance, brutally effective.
One pushback. Getting 4 people in a room for 25 minutes per story is a real cost on a team shipping 30 stories a sprint. Does this scale? Honestly, it never fully did. That scheduling cost is why most teams who tried it lapsed, which is the perfect setup for the next slide. Let me guess. The workshop has such a regular shape that an agent can run it.
You've seen the deck. Yes, that's exactly where we're going.
Alright, the agent shaped version of the workshop. Same 4 card colors, no meeting room.
And the reason it works is the thing we just said. Example mapping has such a regular shape that it's basically a prompt template. Rules, examples, questions. Step 1. You hand the agent one spec section and ask it to extract every business rule it can find.
One section, not the whole spec?
One section. Scoping the context keeps the rule list tight and the citations honest, which is the second half of step 1. Every rule has to cite the spec line it came from.
The citation requirement is doing anti-hallucination work, right?
All of it. Without citations, the model lists what a shipping feature usually has. Because it's read 10,000 shipping features, you'll get a beautifully plausible rule about expedited shipping that appears nowhere in your spec.
Confidently inventing requirements, the most senior behavior a model can exhibit.
With a citation requirement, every rule is grounded or it's visibly ungrounded. Either way, you can check it in seconds. Step 2. For each rule, the agent proposes 3 kinds of example: happy path, boundary, violating case.
So for the $50 threshold, $49.99, 50 exactly, and the coupon case.
Every time for every rule without fail. And this is where the agent genuinely beats the meeting. In a live workshop, humans are sharp for the first 4 rules. By rule 7, people are checking their phones, and the boundary cases get sloppy.
The agent doesn't get bored on rule 7.
Doesn't get bored, doesn't get hungry, doesn't have a 2 o'clock. Exhaustiveness used to be expensive. Now, it's the cheap part.
Step 3 is the one I suspect people skip. Asking for the questions.
Always skipped, and it's the highest value prompt in the set. You explicitly ask, what does this spec not say? Do gift cards count toward the threshold? Per shipment or per order? Each ambiguity becomes a red card on a list for humans.
Are models actually good at that though? Spotting absences is harder than spotting presences.
In isolation, mediocre. But here's the trick. An agent that has just systematically enumerated the rules is in exactly the right position to see the gaps between them. The enumeration is the scaffolding. Cold, you get generic questions. After steps 1 and 2, you get sharp ones.
So the workshop order isn't just ceremony, it's a chain of thought structure. Rules first, then examples, then the holes fall out.
That's exactly what it is. Matt Wynn accidentally designed a great prompt a decade early. And step 4, humans do the only part that actually needs humans. Answer the red cards, approve the example set.
So 25 minutes of meeting becomes 10 minutes of async review.
And the scaling problem from the last slide dissolves. 30 stories a sprint is fine when the mapping is generated and the humans only adjudicate.
The division of labor box says it well. The agent is exhaustive, the humans are decisive. Coverage from the machine, judgment from the people.
That's the sentence to keep. And it sets up the big picture, the full loop, from spec to running scenarios.
The flagship slide. Let's do it.
Okay, this is the slide the whole deck has been building toward. The full loop, spec to verified behavior, end to end.
Reading the diagram, spec section in, agent drafts gherkin, human review gate, agent generates the glue, scenarios run in CI, red loops back to fixing code, green means spec line verified.
And the box I want to spend most of our time on is the diamond in the middle, the human review gate.
Because of where it sits?
Because of what it's reviewing. Not TypeScript, not selectors, plain language behavior. Should a $50 cart ship free? A product manager answers that in 5 seconds with total confidence.
Versus asking them to review a page object. Or worse, asking an engineer to infer business intent from a locator.
Right. And that's the deep reason BDD and coding agents fit so unreasonably well together. The approval gate sits at exactly the layer humans are qualified to judge. The feature file is the contract. It gets the careful read. Everything below it is mechanical consequence.
Hold on. I want to push on mechanical consequence. The agent generated glue can still be wrong, can't it? Correct gherkin, buggy step definition.
It can, and good catch. But think about what kind of wrong it is. A buggy step usually fails visibly. It can't find the element, the assertion throws, the scenario can't even go green. The dangerous failure is a step that passes while checking the wrong thing. And that's exactly what spot checking the glue is for. Careful read on the contract, lighter read on the glue. Not zero read.
Lighter, not none. Okay, that's fair. So why does the glue generation matter so much historically?
Because the glue is what killed BDD the first time around. Teams loved the gherkin. Readable specs, PM buy-in, the whole pitch. Then they discovered every sentence needed an engineer to handwrite a step definition, plus page objects, plus maintenance forever.
So the spec layer everyone wanted came bundled with a tax nobody had budgeted.
And teams quietly dropped the gherkin and kept the raw test framework. I watched that movie at two different companies in the 2010s. Agents invert it. Glue is patterned, verifiable, regenerable. It's exactly the kind of code generation that works reliably today.
Regenerable is an interesting word choice. You'd actually throw glue away and regenerate it?
We've done it. Major UI rework. Instead of hand migrating 40-page objects, we regenerated them from the approved feature files plus the new DOM, then reviewed the diff. When the source of truth lives in the gherkin, the layer below it becomes almost disposable.
Huh. The feature file as the durable artifact and the code as a build product. That's a real inversion.
And then the loop closes in CI, which brings us to the red arrow, the rule I'd print on the wall. When a scenario goes red, you fix the code to match the scenario, never the scenario to match the code.
Because the scenario was approved. It's the spec.
The moment you bend an approved scenario to make a build pass, your executable specification becomes executable fiction. And everyone keeps trusting it, which is so much worse than nobody trusting it.
Edge case though, sometimes the scenario is genuinely wrong. The spec changed or the example mapping missed something. You can't never touch scenarios.
Correct. And the rule has a second clause for that. Scenario changes go back through the gate. You can absolutely change a scenario. You just can't change it as a side effect of making CI pass at 6 p.m. on a Friday. It's a spec change. It gets a spec review.
So the invariant is really the feature file only changes through approval in both directions.
That's the whole loop. Spec to scenarios to glue to verdict. With one human gate at the one layer humans judge best.
Which leaves the question the loop doesn't answer. What happens when the spec itself moves and the scenarios don't?
Drift. Next slide. And it's the failure mode nobody talks about. Here's the failure mode nobody puts in conference talks. Your suite is green. Dashboard's a wall of check marks. Everyone's happy.
I sense a but coming.
But the spec changed 2 months ago. Free shipping moved from $50 to $75, and the scenarios still verify 50. The tests pass, they just pass against last quarter's product.
That's nasty because nothing looks wrong. No red, no alert, no signal at all.
Which is why the warning box says a green suite verifying a stale spec is worse than no suite. No suite, at least people stay paranoid and test manually. A stale green suite radiates confidence that nothing has earned.
Confidence is the product. And this is counterfeit confidence. Okay, how do you catch it? Spec is a markdown file, scenarios are feature files, nothing connects them.
That's the root cause. And step 1 fixes exactly that. A tagging convention. Every scenario carries a tag naming the spec section it verifies. @spec: checkout 3.2.
So the spec to scenario mapping becomes data instead of tribal memory.
Data you can query. It's the same idea as requirement traceability matrices from the aerospace and medical device world. Those folks have done this for decades because auditors make them. We're just getting it for the price of a tag instead of a compliance team.
Regulated industries as accidental profits. Okay, step 2. The tags exist. Then what?
Then, drift detection becomes a CI job on every spec PR. The agent reads the spec diff, looks up every scenario tagged to the change sections, and rederives what those scenarios should say under the new spec.
Oh, that's clever. It's the same generation task from the loop slide. Just run as a comparison. Generate what should exist, diff it against what does exist.
Exactly. No new capability needed. Same skill pointed backwards.
And the output is the 3-bucket report?
Contradictions, gaps, orphans. Contradictions are scenarios that now disagree with the spec, the 50 versus 75 case. Gaps are new spec lines with no scenario covering them. Orphans are scenarios verifying requirements that got deleted.
Orphans are sneaky expensive too. They're pure runtime cost. 30 seconds a run forever, verifying a promise nobody is making anymore.
And worse, they fail someday, and someone spends an afternoon fixing a test for a feature that was removed in March. Ask me how I know.
I will not, out of respect. The last bullet. The agent goes further than a report?
It opens a companion PR with the proposed feature file updates. So the human reviews a concrete diff. Change 50 to 75 in these 4 scenarios. Delete these 2 orphans, instead of receiving a to-do list.
That's the pattern that actually gets adopted, in my experience. Reports get ignored, diffs get reviewed, there's a merge button and an approval ritual people already have muscle memory for.
Meet the team inside their existing workflow, always. And notice the gate from the loop slide is preserved. The scenario change still goes through human approval. It just arrives pre-drafted.
So with this running, the suite stops being a snapshot of the spec at generation time and becomes a mirror that stays current.
A living mirror. Which tees up the next idea perfectly. If the suite mirrors the spec and runs on every build, it isn't just tests anymore. It's documentation.
Living documentation. Let's see it. The report is the status meeting. That's a provocative slide title.
It's the quiet superpower everything else has been building toward. The test report becomes the project's documentation and its progress bar.
Start with the artifact. Cucumber's HTML report. Every feature, every scenario, pass or fail.
In plain English, because the scenarios are in plain English. And failures come with the playwright screenshot and trace attached. Hand that link to anyone, a stakeholder, a new hire, an auditor, and they can read what the product does and see whether it currently does it.
No translation layer. Nobody has to convert test names like checkout underscore spec underscore 3 into English for the steering meeting.
Because the PM already approved the English. The middle bullet is the one I'd lead with though. The honest progress bar.
34 of 41 checkout scenarios green.
That's a fact. Reproducible, specific, impossible to negotiate with. Now compare it to the answer you usually get in a status meeting. We're about 80% done.
80% done has meant everything and nothing on every project in history. The last 20% takes the other 80% of the time.
Every single time. But here's why the scenario count escapes that trap. The denominator is fixed upfront. When scenarios are drafted from the spec before the build starts, 41 is the size of the promise. The green count is literally the percentage of the spec that demonstrably works.
As long as the scenarios actually came first. If you write them as you go, the denominator inflates alongside the numerator, and the metric is theater again.
Yes, that's the fine print. And it's why this metric only works inside spec-driven development. The spec fixes the denominator. And it changes stand-up, by the way. Instead of, how's checkout going? Pretty good, mostly done. It's 7 scenarios read. Here they are by name.
The conversation shifts from vibes to a list. Okay, third bullet. A failed scenario is a broken promise. Strong words for a test failure.
Deliberately strong. A red scenario is not a CI annoyance. It's a specific commitment, made in the spec, approved by a human, that the product is not keeping right now.
And with the add spec tags from the drift slide, the broken promise traces to the exact spec line it came from.
So triage starts with full context. Who promised this? Where and when? The framing matters culturally too. Teams that call red flaky test noise ignore red. Teams that call red a broken promise fix red. Same pixels, different civilization.
And the last bullet, docs that cannot rot. This is the comparison with the wiki.
Every company has the wiki. Written with love during some documentation sprint 2 years ago, describing a checkout flow that no longer exists.
Our onboarding doc still references a service we decommissioned last summer. New hires follow it faithfully into a wall.
And nobody notices because prose rots silently. Executable documentation can't rot silently. The moment behavior and description disagree, something turns red in CI. That's the deepest meaning of living documentation. Docs with a heartbeat.
And the practical move in the green box. Publish the HTML report from CI on every main branch build and share the link.
Most honest dashboard you'll ever ship. And it costs one line of pipeline config. Okay, that's the whole happy path. Before we wrap, the autopsy section.
The anti-patterns, my favorite part of any deck.
Every dead BDD suite died of the same few diseases. Let's name them.
Oh, this scenario. I've reviewed this exact scenario. I think I've written this exact scenario.
Everyone has. And here's the dangerous part. Everything on this slide compiles, runs, and probably passes. The badness is invisible to the toolchain.
Okay, autopsy. Start with the when. Logs in and adds 3 items and applies a coupon and proceeds and confirms the address. 5 actions welded into one step.
The conjunctive step. 2 problems land immediately. First, reuse dies. No other scenario will ever need that exact 5-action combination.
So the step definition is single-use code wearing a reusable costume.
Perfectly put. Second, when it fails, where did it fail? The report just says the when went red. Was it the login? The coupon? The address form?
Time to go spelunking through the trace viewer. There go 20 minutes per failure.
And there's a tell for spotting these in review, by the way. Count the ands. A when with 2 or more ands is almost always a scenario trying to escape.
A scenario trying to escape. I like that. Okay, the given. Bob, age 34, from Springfield with a blue avatar.
Poor Bob. Does his age affect checkout? His town? The avatar?
Presumably not.
Presumably. And that word is the cost. Every reader has to wonder. Maybe there's regional pricing? Maybe age gates something? Irrelevant detail isn't neutral. It taxes every future reader with a question the scenario should have answered by omission.
It's the Greta from Germany story again. Readers assume details are load-bearing, so every non-load-bearing detail is a small lie.
Exactly the same disease. And worth flagging. Agent-drafted scenarios are especially prone to it. Models pad scenarios with plausible color, names and ages and cities because that's what training data looks like. It's one of the specific things to strip in review.
Okay, that's a good concrete review heuristic for the agent era. Okay, the then. Cart shows 2730, banner is green, email is sent, inventory decremented.
The assertion buffet. 4 unrelated promises in one breath. When that line fails, which promise broke?
No idea. Could be a pricing bug, could be the email queue, could be a CSS change to the banner.
3 different teams, 1 undifferentiated red mark. And notice the banner is green assertion is also at the wrong altitude entirely. That's styling, not behavior.
So the refactor in the green box, split into one scenario per behavior. Coupon pricing gets a scenario, the confirmation email gets a scenario, inventory gets a scenario.
Each with a single when, a single core then, and only the details that earn their place. And the lovely thing is, the refactor is mechanical. It's the kind of cleanup you can hand to an agent with the 4 habits as the prompt and get a reviewable PR back.
The machine cleaning up the mess the machine made. The circle of life.
As long as a human approves both ends of the circle. Those are the sins inside one scenario.
And next, the ones that operate at the scale of the whole suite?
The sweet killers. 4 of them. So scenario level sins hurt readability. These 4 kill the practice itself. Disease 1. Shared mutable state.
Scenario B passes only because scenario A ran first and left a user in the database. The classic.
The suite becomes a house of cards. Run it in a different order, it collapses. Try to parallelize, it collapses. And the failure messages are pure gaslighting. The test that breaks is never the test that's wrong.
We covered the cure already though, right? The world pattern, per scenario data.
Every scenario builds its own universe. No exceptions. And especially no shared test user named test@test.com that 40 scenarios quietly fight over. Every company has that user. That user has seen things.
That user's cart is a war zone. Okay, disease 2. The 500 scenario suite nobody reads. This one's subtler.
Subtler and sadder. 3 years of accumulation, and nobody has read most of them in months. And here's the uncomfortable accounting. The entire value proposition of Gherkin is that it gets read.
Right, because the layer isn't free. You pay the indirection, the step matching, the extra abstraction.
You pay the Gherkin tax either way. If nobody reads the scenarios, you're paying the tax and collecting none of the benefit. At that point, it's not a specification. It's slow regression noise wearing a specification costume.
Devil's advocate. Slow regression noise still catches regressions. Isn't an unread suite better than nothing?
Fair challenge. But if regression coverage is all you want, plain playwright tests do it with less machinery. The Gherkin layer earns its cost only as a communication artifact. Coverage theater is the phrase on the slide. 500 scenarios that exist to make the number big, not to document behavior.
And the sizing heuristic at the bottom gives the honest target. Scenarios roughly equal business rules times meaningful boundaries.
So a checkout feature has dozens of scenarios, not hundreds. If your scenario count looks like your unit test count, the layers have leaked into each other.
Which is disease 3. Everything through the browser. Date formatting, input validation, edge case math, all running as 30-second browser sessions.
Unit test material smuggled into the most expensive runtime you own. The arithmetic is brutal. A browser scenario costs tens of seconds. A unit test costs a millisecond. 4 to 5 orders of magnitude.
And the boundary rule for what deserves a scenario?
Behavior the business named. If a PM said it out loud, it can be a scenario. If only an engineer would ever care. Email regex edge cases, leap year handling, it's a unit test. The pyramid didn't stop applying because the tooling got nicer. Lots of unit tests, fewer integration. A focused set of end-to-end scenarios on top.
And disease 4. Retry until green. I have strong feelings about this one.
Go on, get it out.
Every CI system makes it one config line. Retries, 2. And it feels so pragmatic. The test's just flaky. Retry it. Unblock the team. But what you've actually shipped is a policy that read sometimes means nothing.
And a team that's learned read sometimes means nothing has no specification at all. That's the beginning of the end. First the retries, then the skip annotations. Then someone proposes deleting the suite, and honestly, by then, they're right.
So 0 retries ever? Even for genuinely infra-flaky stuff, network blips, cold starts.
My rule: a retry is a tourniquet, not a treatment. Acceptable for a day with a tracking ticket and an owner. The permanent answers are fix the flake or delete the scenario. A deleted scenario is honest. A retried one lies at a configurable frequency.
Lies at a configurable frequency. Putting that in our CI guidelines verbatim.
Take it. That's the full tour. The language, the machinery, the agents, the diseases.
Cheat sheet time?
Cheat sheet time. The whole deck on one slide. 3 columns: concept, rule of thumb, and my favorite column on any cheat sheet: the failure mode each rule exists to prevent.
The third column is the good one, agreed. Rules without their failure modes are just vibes with formatting.
Let's walk it. Row 1: Gherkin scenarios. One when, one behavior, declarative language.
Preventing unlocatable failures and redesign breakage. That's the imperative login slide and the one behavior habit compressed into a cell.
Row 2: Scenario outlines. Rows are named boundaries, 6 or fewer per table.
Preventing the 43-row shipping calculator. 22 minutes of CI I'll never get back, and I wasn't even on that team.
The story travels. Row 3: Step definitions stay thin. Page objects own every selector.
So a UI change touches one file instead of 40, the layering row.
Row 4: World plus hooks. Fresh state per scenario. Own data per worker. That's your structural immunity to order dependence and parallel flakiness. The two ghosts that haunt every browser suite.
Rest in peace, test@test.com.
Gone but not forgotten. Row 5: Tags. Smoke on every PR, the full suite nightly, and ad-spec links on everything.
Preventing the 40-minute PR loop and untraceable failures. Honestly, the ad-spec convention might be the highest leverage single row here. Everything in the bottom half depends on it.
It is the linchpin. One tag per scenario, and suddenly drift detection, traceability, and the broken promise framing all become possible. Cheapest infrastructure you'll ever build.
Row 6. Example mapping. Rules, examples, questions, 25 minutes a story.
Preventing spec holes found in production. The red cards are the product. Every unanswerable question is an incident you cancelled in advance.
Row 7. The agent loop. Agent drafts and generates, human approves behavior.
And the failure mode it prevents is historical. The glue code tax that killed BDD adoption the first time around. That row is the reason this deck exists in 2026 instead of being a nostalgia piece.
And row 8. Drift detection. Spec PR triggers scenario re-derivation, so you never end up with a green suite verifying last quarter's product.
The counterfeit confidence killer. And if 8 rows is still too many, the slide gives you the one-sentence version at the bottom.
Gherkin is the spec made executable. Keep it declarative, keep it linked, and let agents pay the glue tax.
3 clauses. And notice they map to the 3 big failure modes. Declarative beats redesign breakage. Linked beats drift. Agents beat the tax.
Huh, the one-liner is load-bearing. That's rare.
We try. Final takeaways next, and then we let everyone go. All right, landing the plane. 5 things to carry out of this one.
Number 1. Gherkin is the executable spec.
And the word doing the work there is executable. The translation from acceptance criterion to scenario is nearly mechanical. And that's the feature, not a coincidence. The criterion already had given when then shape before anyone wrote Gherkin.
One sentence, 3 masters. The PM reads it, the agent generates from it, CI enforces it.
That triple duty is the entire value of the layer. Remove any one audience and you'd pick a simpler tool.
Number 2. Declarative or dead. Strong phrasing.
Earned phrasing. The moment a selector appears in a Gherkin file, that scenario has signed its own death warrant. The next redesign executes it. I watched 180 of them die in one rebrand, remember?
A sprint of selector, find and replace. Maybe never.
Intent in the feature file, mechanics in the page objects, where one edit heals the whole suite. Number 3. Example mapping before Gherkin.
Don't write scenarios cold.
Map the story first. Rules, examples, questions, and treasure the red cards. Every question nobody in the room can answer is a production incident you just prevented for the price of an index card. Then the green cards become your scenarios nearly for free.
And in 2026, the mapping itself can be agent run, with humans only adjudicating. The economics finally work at 30 stories a sprint.
Which is takeaway 4. Agents pay the glue tax. The historical reason BDD failed was never the gherkin. It was the grind of step definitions and page objects, sentence after sentence, forever. That grind is now nearly free.
And the human contribution compresses to the one thing humans are uniquely qualified for: deciding what the behavior should be and approving it in plain language.
Judgment up, toil down. The right direction for the division of labor.
And number 5, a failed scenario is a broken promise.
The mindset that holds the whole thing together. Red is not noise. Red is a specific commitment made in the spec that the product is not keeping right now, traceable to the exact line that made it.
Fix the code, never bend the scenario.
Because the moment you bend one, your living documentation starts lying. And it lies in green, which is the most convincing color.
You know what strikes me zooming out? None of the 5 are really about testing. They're about keeping one source of truth honest across 3 audiences.
That's the series thesis in one line, honestly. The tests are just the enforcement arm of the spec.
Should have opened with that.
Saving it for the rerun. So, specs you can read, scenarios you can run, documentation that can't rot. That's the BDD layer.
Good one, this. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you in the next deck of the series.